Hi, everybody. Welcome. We will get started in about 30 seconds, just as we're waiting for everyone to enter in. Great. I will go ahead and kick us off. So good morning, good afternoon, and evening, everybody. On behalf of the Dalberg, Shell, Mercy Corps, IFC, GOGLA, and Global Plan of Action teams, we welcome you to a discussion series on private sector engagement in humanitarian energy. First and foremost, we do hope that you and your families are healthy as well, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. A quick introduction to myself. I'm Jyoti Vainathaya. I'm an associate partner at Dalberg, an impact-focused strategy firm based in Mumbai, in India. I'd like to start us off today with just a quick overview of what to expect over the next 2.5 hours. We are honored to have representatives from across the humanitarian sector, energy enterprises, and research and advisory organizations engage in what we hope to be a dynamic dialogue around the opportunities for improved collaboration towards energy access in situations of displacement. We have 3 panels. You can see the agenda here on the screen. Panel 1 aims to set the scene, essentially with the need, the challenges, and the opportunity for private sector engagement. Why are we having this dialogue in the first place? Panel 2 aims to highlight experiences and lessons learned from the field across a range of energy enterprises who have engaged in the humanitarian setting in the past. And then finally, we end with panel 3, which aims to look forward and ask what models work and when. We'll be moving at quite a fast pace through these 3 sessions. Each will have about 25 to 30 minutes of a panel discussion, plus 10 to 15 minutes of audience questions and answers. So once we begin the panel, please do submit your questions to the organizers in the questions tab of the GoToWebinar platform. We will collate and try and respond to as many of those as we can, time permitting. And if you have any other questions for the organizers, feel free to send those in as well. So without further ado, I'd like to take us to the first panel, which will be facilitated by Gaurav Gupta. Gaurav is partner and Asia Regional Director of Dalberg Advisors. He leads our global energy practice and has over a decade of experience in the off-grid energy space across lighting and cooking, energy financing, and designing marketplace solutions. So really excited to start us off today. Thanks everyone for being here. And over to you, Gaurav.
Thanks, Jyoti, and it's my pleasure to just introduce this whole session. So I'm going to present a few slides and then introduce my panelists that are sort of going to get into the meat of this. So bear with me, I'm just going to put these slides up. Hold on. And if the magic works, you should all be able to see that. Okay, so you know the discussion today is about how we can provide clean energy through the private sector to the millions of refugees. And I think to set the scene, what I wanted to do is go through just some of the basic data around this. If you look at displaced people around the world, the numbers are rising and they're more protracted. The protracted aspect is very important because people often consider this a very transitory notion of refugees fleeing for a certain short amount of time, but actually what we see is that they live out in very protracted situations. Depending on where you get the numbers, if you're looking at the UNHCR, it's 20 million official refugees. If you then look at UNRWA, there's another 5-6 million that will include the Palestinian refugees. If you look at internally displaced people, we're looking at 80 million people. So it's a sizable population that is displaced. And the numbers that are actually in protracted situation are also growing, right? And the percentage of that is also growing. Let's look at that in numbers, right? So most households living in camps and settlements, and camps and settlements are perhaps the most recognizable form of this challenge. On average, the median number of years for a household is 4. The mean, the average is actually 10 years. And if you look at the age of most camps, they're around, the average is around 17 years. So we're not talking about sort of very temporary formats here. We're talking about situations that are resembling villages and small towns and even cities in many respects. And we also have to remember that even though there's 2 to 3 million people at any moment living, households living inside camps, that's households, there's another 6 million households, refugee households that are living in host communities that are often within that 10-kilometer radius of these original households. 80% of these households either have no or low access to energy, relying on cheap batteries and firewood. And we've seen that situation play out with people outside of refugee situations, and the private sector has started to address that challenge, but it still sustains to a large degree for those in refugee situations. And if you look at the spend, households are spending over $170 a year in meeting their sort of cooking and lighting needs. The majority of it does go into cooking, but these are the 2 main areas. And you see a lot of expenditure that's going into the kind of batteries and wood that you would imagine there are much better solutions for. On top of that individual household challenge, if you look at humanitarian agencies, they themselves are spending over $140 million in and near camps on effectively diesel-powered energy. This is for all the major infrastructure that a lot of these camps and surrounding organizations need. And across all the stakeholders, if you take host communities, institutions, the amount that institutions then spend to provide energy to others, not just themselves, businesses, displaced households, there's about a $1.6 billion spend that's going into annually into energy. That's electricity and cooking. We know that by transferring that to greener lighting and cooking solutions, there are significant benefits. Of course, expenditure is key. That's what gets people in. There's a huge savings that households can generate and institutions can generate. But of course, there's an emissions opportunity, but especially with cooking, there's also enormous health impact as we start to see people shift towards cleaner forms of cooking, about 40–50% reduction in the kind of particulate matter that you see with non-clean cooking. But there are challenges, and our esteemed guests will talk a bit about them. There's the logistical cost. These camps are often in very remote locations. There's limited data about understanding who are the people that we're trying to sell to. There's demand uncertainty. Populations may be transient, but as we also discussed, perhaps not as much as we think. There's certainly a lot of policy uncertainty. Who's allowed into camps? Can the private sector engage? What licensing is needed? And institutional requirements around procurement is complex, right? And so these are some of the challenges that we need to get through. But there is significant momentum. The UNHCR has committed itself to a clean energy challenge, which will require it to leverage the private sector in achieving its aims. Countries are signing up to the Comprehensive Response Refugee Framework. That means they are signing up to be able to provide key amounts of energy to refugees. And you're also seeing that there is cash-based assistance as replacing donation. That means putting purchasing power in the hands of refugee populations, which can go towards increasing purchasing power for these kind of goods. So the big question is, how might we actually improve, pave the way for improved collaboration between the private sector and the humanitarian sector to improve energy access for displaced persons? Hopefully that sets us up for the discussion. So if we can stop sharing my screen and go back, I will be delighted to introduce the panel. Terrific. And we have a great set of speakers today. We'll both be engaging in a dialogue and answering some of your questions. So firstly, delighted to introduce Eva Hatzidamou, who is the head of Shell's energy program, energy program, focused on developing market-based approaches for humanitarian energy, fostering cross-sectoral collaboration. And her portfolio includes initiatives to reduce market entry barriers for private sector actors in the area of data, skills, and finance. So perfect for the discussion that we're about to have. Also delighted to have Cecilia Ragazzi, is the Access to Energy lead at Mercy Corps, and she provides the technical support to design and deliver programs in humanitarian energy. She previously managed a multi-country EU-funded program that focused on women's economic development through renewable energy. And last but not least, we have Ephraim Ferrari, who's a consultant at IFC Lighting Global, and led the energy access assessment in Lebanon, supporting Syrian refugees and the host community. He has also worked on lighting Pakistan, lighting Afghanistan, promoting a commercial market for sustainable, accessible, and clean energy off-grid lighting products for rural communities. So again, a wealth of experience in how to make this work on the ground, but also, I think, really addressing the challenges. So let's start a bit broad. I'm going to ask Cecilia to just, when we talk about this idea of the role of the private sector, what do we actually mean? What is this thing, this role that the private sector has in humanitarian energy, Cecilia? And why is it important?
Hi, I hope you can all hear me all right. Yeah? Okay, so thank you very much for the question. I think that it really speaks to Mercy Corps, as partnerships are definitely at the core of our operating model. Humanitarian settings are surely not an exception for us in this. And in the energy space specifically, we are seeing growing needs. Also a very welcome increased attention to quality and a diversification of business models. And this is for us a great opportunity for a greater impact. To seize this opportunity, I believe that humanitarian agencies need to join forces with industry experts, and we do that through solid and vetted partnerships. So I think that everybody here in this panel and in the audience would agree on the fact that energy access is a catalyzer for humanitarian and development outcomes, and it requires definitely specific skills both on the demand and on the supply sides. From experience at Mercy Corps, we understand that a demand is a function of increased awareness and trust in products and the providers of these products. And this is why we decided to partner with companies that builds on offer on quality certified products. An example is Schneider Electric, which is going to be in the second panel today. At Mercy Corps, we are very aware of our strengths. So for instance, we are registered in the country where we operate. We partner with local organizations. We have excellent understanding of displacement context, local dynamics, and players at stake. But we are also aware of where we fall short. And I think we agree that the technical energy access solutions are very dependent on the contextual factors, from regulatory environment to system designs. And we can't pretend that we have this expertise. Some private sector actors started to consider humanitarian contexts as a potential market, but on their hand, they usually lack the footprint, the full contextual understanding, and the access to displacement settings. And sometimes their technology needs to be adapted to this context and the specific needs of the population. So we know that at Mercy Corps, we can facilitate the private sector entrance in these markets. And we believe that by bridging the gap between humanitarian and private sector actors, we're able to provide a better service to displaced people. And we can increase their dignity also by offering them different quality services and products that they can choose from. In the displacement settings we work with, we see families spending an average of $17 per month on energy products that often are of poor quality, short lifespan, and they're often polluting. Our mission is to give these people the possibility to choose better products and to ensure that their consumer rights are protected by holding private sector companies accountable. So I think that we know from our own experience that it's very hard to strike a delicate balance. On one hand, we have the needs and the desires of displaced individual, and basically really their need of having a better quality of life. And on the other hand, we understand the requirements of the private sector to be able to work effectively in non-traditional and often unexplored markets. We believe that by navigating this balance, we are stronger and our impact is greater. And this is why we seek a collaboration with the shared value partners.
Thanks, Cecilia. I think you've made a sort of you outlined a good reason for the skills of the private sector that are so useful, and I can see how you can help them navigate. But maybe, and Eva, maybe you can come in on this, but why would the private sector find this interesting, right? Why should they engage from their perspective? They certainly have the right skills, but what's interesting for them?
Yeah. So indeed, I think the main reason for private sector companies to engage is because they can add value. And I think we're all after the same thing, which is to be able to provide affordable and sustainable energy access solutions for displaced people. And this plays on the strengths of the private sector companies. So, I'll just build on one of the points that Cecilia touched upon earlier. Private actors are able to provide dignity of choice. They have a suite of products and services that can meet needs of displaced people. And I think that's very important from a sustainability point of view, because we know that if a product addresses your real needs, you're likelier to use it and you're likelier to take care of it. So I think that's one very important reason. I think another perspective is that private sector companies can, of course, bring speed and innovation in addressing the big challenge that exists in the humanitarian sector. Energy access companies, of course, have experience in setting up successful models in off-grid rural communities. And there are similarities with displacement settings. Having said that, displacement settings, like Cecilia explained, bring an extra layer of complexities, and they definitely need the support of the humanitarian sector. But by bringing in the private sector, the humanitarian sector can leverage that expertise and make progress quicker. And finally, I think the private sector has the technical, the financial, commercial expertise to run sustainable models over the longer term that hopefully will rely less and less on subsidies going forward. But I think there are other ways in which private sector companies can be of value to this really complex challenge. Just like to point out, for example, what we as Shell are doing in this space. We made a commitment a few years ago to work with the humanitarian sector to find sustainable access to energy solutions, because we think that we have the commercial expertise, the energy project expertise to bring. And but we're also very much aware of the fact that we can only do this in collaboration. As such, we've collaborating with humanitarian partners like Mercy Corps in Ethiopia, but also with IOM in Mozambique. And really our aim is to come up with access to energy concepts that can be tested, implemented on the ground, and hopefully we can validate and create cases that have the potential to reach scale. And we're doing this on a non-profit basis. For us, really, our aim as Shell is to help improve living conditions and livelihoods. And it's a learning journey for us, but I think also a learning journey for the humanitarian sector, because nobody has been able to crack this yet, but we're making progress. So I just wanted to highlight this as well. There are multiple ways in which the private sector can add value, either directly by providing products and services, technologies, or by sharing expertise in the way that we do.
Thanks, Eva. We will come back to this whole non-profit thing, because I think we're also interested to see actually there is hopefully money to be made, because that's hopefully will encourage that innovation. So Ephraim, one thing that Eva said was dignity of choice. And that's of course always important, but it's also part, one of the challenges is that we're dealing with a very diverse population. And I mean, I shared some very high level numbers. It'd be great if you could just bring the audience into who is this consumer? What are the different variety of settings in which we're talking about this concept of refugees and displaced people?
Thanks, Laura. And yeah, I definitely think that this is one of the key aspects, and it's really complicated in one way. Is adding again another layer of complexity to this topic, because what we're seeing is that refugees is a very, first of all, big population of people, as you have mentioned earlier on in your slides. But even if we look within one single country or one single reality. We see a very differentiated typology of potential consumers, and we have really experienced this in this market assessment you were mentioning earlier on, that with a few colleagues we have conducted in Lebanon, looking at the Syrian refugees. And the situation in Lebanon is quite particular in a way, but it represents well the variety of situation that we might encounter when you enter into this sector. And we have seen basically three main types, or we have assessed three main types of potential consumers, ranging from the Syrian refugees living in informal camps, Syrian refugees living in rented accommodations, and then also we surveyed some Lebanese host communities living nearby. And by assessing their energy requirements, we understood that of course expectations and needs varies a lot among these three categories of people. And starting for, of course, the Syrian refugees living in informal camps, which were the poorest one, unfortunately, and those that, notwithstanding their livelihood situation, were still spending a considerable amount of money on polluting energy sources. We have estimated an expenditure of around $25 to $30 per month per household. This number increased to $45 to $50 for Syrians living in rented accommodation, and then of course it goes up to $75 per month for Lebanese host communities. This is to say that the market and the people that we are looking at is very diversified, and as Eva, I think, very rightly said, the private sector has the capacity to somehow provide an answer to these different needs and different aspirations also, of course, which are not only, I would also like to mention, this not only linked to their current livelihoods, but also to the past livelihoods of these people before they became displaced.
And I presume, I mean, those numbers are astonishing, but also worth recognizing that, you know, when we talk about $70 a month, I'm presuming that's an enormous chunk of the available cash that the population has. Would that be right?
That is very, very true. And this is even more striking is that the proportion of their expenditure increase. If we look at the poorest segment of the populations, for example, Syrian refugees living in camp spend more money in proportion on the energy requirements compared to those better off.
And we've spoken about these households, and that already is a big market. But Cecilia, you will have, as part of the work that you guys have done, and also sort of thought about obviously the consumption amongst institutions, which remains very sort of diesel based and so forth, and is large, right? And we estimate $140 million being spent each year. Can you tell us a little bit about the consumption amongst institutions and how today it's being purchased?
Yeah, sure. So I definitely would add also the humanitarian sector to this course, because it's estimated that our sector per year spends around 1.2 billion USD, which is definitely a good chunk of money that is currently used mainly for polluting energy sources, which of course really goes against the principles that we are saying here, but also is unsustainable. It doesn't really add any value. So we think that through partnerships, once again, we can really try to support overcoming these unsustainable expenses. So for instance, with the Shell and leading mini-grid developers, such as PowerGen, and in dialogue with UNHCR, in Ethiopia, we are trying to build a sustainable model that we want to be replicable and scalable, to provide energy access to three main tiers of clients. And these are institutions, so we're really like looking at UN, other NGOs, businesses belonging to both refugees and host communities, and finally households connections for families in the refugee camps. Basically, the idea is really that through this model, we wanted to build on the best practices that we find in greening operations internationally by the two national standards that are quite high in Ethiopia. And directly impact in a positive way, of course, the lives of refugees for everything that spans from protection concerns to livelihood outcomes. So we really think that the main idea at the core of this model is the idea that this is a win-win model for which basically we're asking people to shift the current spend to build something that actually adds value and is sustainable in the longer term. Again, what we are offering to refugees is really the opportunity to choose the type of services that they want to use. So again, that element of personal dignity and individual choice for us is really central. I think that it really is a way to humanize and normalize also this entire discussion.
Cecilia, say a bit more about protection. And there are many people who I think understand that, but many coming from outside, when you say the importance of protection, right? What does that mean in this humanitarian context?
It really means that, for instance, there are many studies that now relate lack of access to energy, again, like electricity, illumination, like in public spaces, for instance, and increased cases of GBV, for instance. And we believe that our proposed solution can really speak to these needs, but it can also really speak about the idea of increasing opportunities, again, for income generating activities for both male and female refugees. And we really think that this is one of the beauties of this model. It really opens up possibility for our refugees and the host communities that live next to the camp. So in this setting specifically, but I know that is really like a common trend, we also see increased tension between host communities and refugees over the competition for biomass, for instance. That could be for cooking, but can also really be for lighting. By providing this alternative solution, we think that we have something at hand that can really improve the lives of these people.
And I have a few more questions. I think they'll take about 5-6 minutes, but so for the audience, please start thinking about some of the questions you have, and we have an opportunity in the chat for you to ask those questions. But Eva, we've set it up that the skills of the private sector needed, they have the solutions, there seems to be an ability and certainly a huge desire to pay, right? So you've got a customer and it's a sizable market. But what are the challenges? I mean, I mentioned some of the more obvious challenges, right, around barriers to entry, logistics, getting there, safety, dollars, and so forth. But what are some of the other challenges that are unique to this setting in the work that you found and the work you've done?
Indeed, I think we can all relate to some of the obvious challenges you raised before around logistics, and I'm sure the next panel will talk about it in more detail. But maybe I'd like to flag a more subtle challenge, and as I think because it's very clear to us and all the partners we work with that to come to sustainable solutions in trying to resolve such a complex problem, we'll need to collaborate. And I think as we see increasing this type of strong collaborations between private sector and humanitarian partners, and as you're moving from a more of a kind of a transactional relationship to a more of a partnership approach, you get confronted with each other's ways of working. And I think that can be a bit of a challenge because, of course, the private sector is accustomed to different ways of working than the humanitarian actor is. And if you don't watch out, this can lead to awkward situations, but at worst it could even hamper trust building between the two parties. And I think these are examples that you can probably relate to. But what we saw, for example, that we started working with our humanitarian partners is differences, for example, in how we define success or how we set goals, or how, for example, we manage projects, right? Do we value the success of our projects on whether we are within budget, whether we are on time, whether we're making impact? So that was quite a journey, I think, both for ourselves as a private sector actor, and I know that others have had the same experiences. And I think another subtle challenge is, for example, the vocabulary that is being used. Private sector actors will use terminology such as market and customer and segments, and I can see why certain people or parties in the humanitarian sector might feel uncomfortable with that, because after we're talking about some of the most vulnerable people in the world, And the last thing you want to do is give the sense that we're trying to exploit them, right? That fear always exists when you talk about, or maybe existed, at least in the past. So I think this is a subtle challenge, but doesn't need to be a disastrous one. And you know, for what it's worth, I think in our experience, and probably Cecilia can testify to this, you know, be aware that this challenge could arise. Be aware that you're having to develop a new relationship. But above all, I think it's fair to say that you'll soon realize the complementary skills and expertise that we bring. And I think that's probably the biggest realization, and why we as Shell really believe in this joint approach, right? It will take a village and much more than that to resolve such a complex problem.
So there's this common language, including a common set of metrics, right? To say what success is one of the issues. And actually, that's really interesting because Ephraim, as part of the Lighting Global program, right? I mean, I remember I was there in 2010 when, you know, it sort of exploded onto the scene, and trying to actually say, hey, this isn't just about trying to take a humanitarian approach to providing energy, but let's actually get private sector thinking in here. And, you know, suddenly we were all talking about margins and segments and who to chase. And, you know, ultimately what that led to was a significant growth, more than anyone expected, actually, of the private sector engaging. What are the lessons from that? I mean, is that what we should be using as a blueprint here, or are we kidding ourselves? Because, you know, this is a very different setting and extremely complex. Like, can we just bring in the private sector as was done through the Lighting Global program?
Thanks, Gaurav. And this is, I would say, a $1 million question. Very difficult to answer it, and probably depends again on the different context. I do believe that there are some approaches that Lighting Global has brought forward and somehow has really helped in designing, in addressing these markets' needs. And I think that the three pillars on which the Lighting Global programs were designed, meaning market assessment, conducting detailed market assessment, supporting business development among the different private sector players, and bringing also in awareness campaigns among the consumer is very valid, and is something that we can somehow explore, or rather than explore, extrapolate and bring in also in the humanitarian energy aspect. The feeling or the learnings I have is that, however, it's important to keep flexibility. It's important to keep flexibility in the design of the program, because again, conditions change a lot from one country or from one context to another. And that is something that I've personally learned while working on Afghanistan. This was a sort of pilot project for Lighting Global, linked with a larger initiative in Pakistan, and we initially thought that it was a similar market, and that a similar approach could be undertaken, but actually it didn't really work well. And the reason why it didn't really work well was that consumers in Afghanistan are very different from those in Pakistan. They know much more what solar is, but for example, they are not trusting much when private sector come in with quality. They do not trust much warranty, because probably they have very seldomly experienced these. And thus the approach, the somehow static approach that we have initially thought of, didn't really work out well. And I think this is really the type of mentality that we need to utilize when we are entering into this sector. Keep a very flexible approach, dependent on the condition, which, as we have seen and discussed before, can vary a lot from one context to another.
Yeah. It's a good word of caution. Not to dampen anyone's enthusiasm. Good words of caution. Eva, I'm going to give you the last word on this, because I think part of finishing that story is to then get into investment, right? Because, I mean, a camp here, a setting over here, these feel like small things, but as we presented, there's some large numbers together. So what's the role of finance here? And I'm asking you, well, you know, Shell's big, and Shell has lots of, you know, makes large investments. So I think you have the muscle to think about aggregation. So tell us a bit about what's needed from a finance perspective.
Yeah. So indeed, I do think that private sector investors will need to come into play at some point if we are serious about scaling up and addressing this challenge by 2030. Right, this is the clean energy challenge, providing clean energy to all by that year. That is a big ambition, and indeed, as far as I'm aware at the moment, there are no such large-scale projects yet. I think it's fantastic to see, a number of pilot type one-site projects that are happening, including ourselves, by the way, the ones that we're doing in Ethiopia and Mozambique. But in order to reach that scale, we need to start thinking bigger. Is it fair to expect that this already? I don't know, because a number of these pilots, including our own, still need to prove the validation, some of the assumptions. We need to validate that in order to be able to create an investment case, right? So can these concepts indeed be sustainable over time, financially sustainable, operationally sustainable? These are things that need to be proven. But when the moment comes, the investors indeed can provide the size of the funding and the term of the funding that will support these projects into the future and will release the dependency from the traditional donors. But I think what we can do, as the ones that are working today on projects on the ground, trying to find the solution, is to design our concepts and our pilots in such a way that they have investment potential, if I may call it that way. Because what we know, what investors will be looking at is, the replicability and scalability of the concept. Once you've proven that concept, are you able to take that quickly and replicate that in similar settings and scale it up? Therefore, kind of minimizing the investment cost and maximizing the return. So these concepts of replicability and scalability is definitely something we try to bring into the design of our concepts. And this can be done through multiple ways. Some examples include, for example, partnering with energy access companies or partnering with other actors that you'll need to develop the solution. That have the willingness and the capacity to expand with you, right? If the opportunity arises, are they able to expand to other sites in the region, in the country, or even cross-border? Another way of ensuring that is by creating ownership and operating models that have the potential to include additional sites when that moment comes. So I think these are just some examples of what we can do to ensure the attractiveness of the concepts when the moment comes that we've actually proven that they are financially sustainable.
Great. Now I think aggregation is going to be key, because that's what's going to allow that transaction to happen. So I think we're actually coming up to Q&A, and I'm getting a lot of questions. So I'm going to actually request the panelists. We won't be able to get through all of them, but we'll try. So let's do this very snappily, right? So first question is back to profitability, and I said we'd come back to it, which is, well, and maybe Ephraim, Cecilia, from your experience on the ground, can you offer some assurance to people that there is actually, as a private sector actor, if you were to come in, there are profitable models in existence in serving these communities? We've seen the theory, and I've presented some numbers, but are there profitable models operating on the ground?
You want to go first? I'll go first. Well, my experience, I'll start talking about Afghanistan, which is a country I know much better than Lebanon. In Afghanistan, it is very profitable. There are many private sector firms that are active in the country and that are selling solar products in a very efficient way and effective, I would say. Also, most of those are informal, and it has been very, very difficult for more formal firms to enter such a market. So again, the market is there. Most of the households in Afghanistan actually relies on solar to get access to energy. And when I say most, I mean 70% of the population. So it's not a small market in all the sense. In Lebanon is very similar. I mean, people are spending money, and there are providers that are providing services to those communities. So, and no matter if they are refugees or if they are Lebanese host communities, they are serving both markets. And we have seen these also in our assessment when we asked the retailers to provide some feedbacks on these aspects. So again, to be brief, I do fully believe that there is a market potential. It will be profitable. Of course, it's the issue to me is more to understand exactly what type of product those people need and can afford.
Super. And Cecilia, I think you were also
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, sure. I can definitely add it to these. Again, going back to that idea of segmentation and profitability that are really entering into the humanitarian world. One very practical example is a program that we implemented in Uganda in BDBD settlement, where we partner with the Delight and Village Power, again, two private sector companies, right? And with them at the very beginning of the project, speaking again to that concept of heterogeneity that also Ephraim was mentioning before, we decided to create a different products and repayment methods for different clients. So really like a sort of persona profiles of people that had different interests and different economic opportunities. And we really saw that this methodology worked. We had like an impact that it was much better than what we initially thought. And we are currently actually replicating this same modality, really like offering different repayment methods to different segments, also for a cleaner cooking solutions, still in BDBD. Definitely there's this interest to the point where Village Power is still selling their equipment without any support from our side nowadays, which I think that really speaks to the success of the approach we used.
Yeah, and look, when we sort of went into some of these areas, some of these camps and so forth represent what would be the third or fourth largest city for energy consumption in that country, as an example, right? So certainly I think there is something there, but those challenges are very real. Eva, I want to come back to you because many questions that are coming in have this theme of transition, like, in a way we can talk about, look, we want to create a marketplace, but we're creating a marketplace at the same time as there is actually a relief mentality going on as well. And so, some things are being given away for free. We are transitioning also to a market. Like, there's two things going on at the same time. And so, how do you think about that switch? Is there a does the hybrid actually kill things? Do we need to make a very clean switch from one to the other? Like, how does people are sort of questioning? Is there a timing issue when the private sector should really be thinking about engaging when the switch has actually happened? How do you think about it?
Yeah, good question. And that behavior, that mindset could indeed hinder getting that financial sustainability going. And this is definitely an important, I think, aha moment for the private sector coming in, right? Understanding the dependency or the behaviors that have been ingrained amongst displaced people over a long time when they were giving handouts. We've been to date, we've been looking at sites, to be honest, where we know that the displaced people are accustomed to paying for services. I think that's a good starting point, right? If you want to, test your assumptions quickly, I think you can make it yourself a bit easier by identifying sites where that mentality is perhaps lesser so. And we know already, like Cecilia and Ephraim have said, there are many sites where people have let go of the handout mentality and are paying themselves. So I think you'd probably be positively surprised to see that mentality is quickly diminishing. And that is also supported by the fact that more and more humanitarian institutions are moving away from handouts of things to actually giving cash. And that is, of course, another enabler, giving people the dignity to choose for themselves how they spend their money, instead of being given stuff that they don't really use and they don't see the value of. So I think all in all, yes, this behavior, this mentality exists, but to our positive surprise, it's less than we thought. And to the extent that it exists, I do think it needs to be addressed through, the efforts that Cecilia referred to on the demand activation side, as we call, because a marketplace consists of supply and demand. A lot of the efforts go into setting up the supply chain, coming up with the technical solutions, but equal number of efforts and resources need to be put in educating people about the value of energy access, about making choices, about how can they deploy this energy to improve their living conditions and above all their livelihoods. But also, for example, installing the principles about payment. We know that the private sector is really worried about payment behavior. and then you need to go back. Why do they struggle to pay? Or maybe, if they struggle to pay, is that because they don't have the money, or because they're not used to the concept of actually saving for a certain payment? So I think there is quite some work to be done on that demand side, on educating people about financial literacy and getting them into that behavior that certainly the private sector would like to see more of, to ensure that they get the return that they're hoping for.
Yeah, and I think the question of that return also then gets to this some of the other questions that have come up around, well, how do you calculate that return in a fragile environment? So, and I don't know who, any of you can answer this question, but the people are asking questions around, well, we don't know if these camps will be there for a long time. How do you justify investments that have long paybacks when things are changing? I know that UNHCR and many other organizations have trouble signing contracts for more than a year. So how is it that the private sector can engage in actually making some of these harder CapEx investments in a setting like this? I know we've talked a bit about solar lanterns and households, but we also have a very sizable institutional market. So how do you make some of those CapEx investments in this setting with so much uncertainty?
I can go first if you guys are okay. Yeah, I think that definitely there are contexts that lend themselves more easily to these concepts than others. I'm really thinking about, for instance, those countries, again, including Ethiopia. It was not by chance that we decided to work there, but the countries that signed the comprehensive refugee response framework, for instance, those are really countries that are welcoming refugees in a longer term perspective. So these refugees are there, they're going to stay, and the government is proactively seeking solutions for their integration with the host community around them. So I think that, again, like for instance, these countries are countries where longer term investments can be thought and made because, again, these refugees become a part of the national population, basically.
Thanks, Cecilia. Yeah. Anyone else also wants to jump in on making some of those investments, that's sort of CapEx?
Well, maybe not from a technical perspective, but I think that really what you have also presented before, Gaurav, in terms of slides, give a bit of the perspective of how protracted the situation becomes. And I think that unfortunately this is the reality in most cases. So it is of course difficult to enter into this sector, but at the end somebody is already, in my opinion, in many cases is already providing energy solution to these households, whether they are refugees or host communities. And this is what we have seen in Lebanon too. Syrians are paying for, I don't know, diesel generators that some Lebanese have installed next to their house just to provide the lights to these Syrian refugees living in informal camps because they need energy. So ultimately, I think that the market is already there. There is uncertainty. Yes, this is true. Probably higher uncertainty compared to a normal market. But at the same time, I think that really by building this partnership with humanitarians, many of these difficulties can be overcome.
Cecilia, Eva, one of the questions that's also coming up is not just, so yes, these are protracted situations, as Ephraim mentioned. So there is, if you look into it, you will find segments where you can make these CapEx investments. But the political climate remains highly volatile. Even if the camp is there, the policies that determine what can go in and out are often changing. And I know, Shell is used to that as far as making 20, 30-year-long investments in energy. How does a small business that's trying to provide these energy needs navigate that kind of volatility?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start with Eva and Cecilia, we'll go to you.
No, indeed, I think that's a big challenge, and we've experienced it firsthand in the project in Ethiopia, which I think is, certainly until recently had, probably one of the lesser investment-friendly climates. and we learned it the hard way. And we have the resources as Shell, together with our partners, to go through that whole regulatory framework and maybe push the boundaries a little bit. And thank goodness, at the same time, as you probably know, that market is liberalizing. So many measures started coming into effect, but still it's a hassle. Having said that, that will definitely be a lesson from us, right? Tend to prioritize places where the policies are heading in the right direction, and I think there are many countries where that is already the case, like Uganda, Rwanda, I think are famous places, but in Nigeria, of course, and now another big market potentially like Ethiopia is opening up. But if one of the added values we, through our project Enter Energy, are trying to bring is also to provide clarity on these type of things, and by getting our hands dirty in such projects, we hope to transfer that knowledge and pave the way to other smaller private sector partners who don't have those resources to get into that type of detail. So if the energy access companies that we will hopefully be engaging in Ethiopia project, they will now have gotten access to this kind of information, and hopefully they will use that information to start generating their own projects within the country. So we really hope, in this case, to be the catalyst. We've gone through that effort of understanding the climate, and hopefully we can then share that knowledge and those insights and pave the way for others who may not have those means like we did in this case.
Cecilia, you can have the last word on that. Thanks, Eva.
No, nothing. Just wanted to add that most probably also the second panel today is going really to shape a little bit of this answer as well, because for sure the different technologies that we have available are also really talking about like scalability, modularity, and the fact that some of this infrastructure can actually be dismantled and transported in another site. So again, the financial model that we wanted to attach to the technology model can also really influence the opportunity for investment.
Great. Well, look, thank you for getting through all of that so quickly. And I think we got through many more questions than I thought we would, but I think it's very clear there's an opportunity. There's a very big need and a huge opportunity for impact, especially by the private sector that can be made here. But it's a very bumpy road, more bumpy than already the energy access engagement more broadly that people like Lighting Global have driven in the past. That there's some real challenges, and so helping people overcome that challenge. There were some questions I didn't get through, but I just want to, for the next panel to potentially address, there is a lot of concern around how energy is procured by development sector actors, especially humanitarian organizations, and that is a real obstacle to realizing some of the potential that we were looking at. So thank you, all three of you. That was terrific, and I'll hand it back to Jyoti for our other panelists. Thanks.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Gaurav, Ephraim, Eva, and Cecilia. Really enjoyed the discussion and quite a helpful setup, as you both mentioned. We've actually collated all the questions that we couldn't quite get to here. I think they remain relevant for the subsequent two panelists, so we will continue to go through that. We will take just about a 2.5-minute break before we head into the next session, which is speaking from experience, private sector learnings from engaging in humanitarian energy. So perhaps just a 2-minute break and we'll be right back. Thanks, everybody. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Julian and team. Welcome back. Hope you were able to catch a little bit of a breather. I'd love to transition us to our second panel now. And facilitating us through this discussion is Susie Wielden. Welcome, Susie. Susie is the head of communications and insight at GOGLA. Susie leads GOGLA's research activities and programs, including the multi-country, multi-company Powering Opportunity Impact series. And over to you, Susie, to take us through the next 45 minutes. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Jyoti. And I have the pleasure of introducing our expert panel. As was set up in the previous session, a lot of important role here for the private sector in energy access in the humanitarian setting. And so we have an opportunity to hear from Mansour Hamayan, the Chief Executive of Bbox, Stefan Grumman, the COO of Thinker International, as well as Olivier Jacquet, the Business Development VP for Access to Energy at Schneider Electric, around their different projects or operations to expand energy access in humanitarian settings and to increase the clean energy in those settings. Mansour and Stefan will be sharing a bit about their experiences of increasing energy access for homes and businesses with standalone solar solutions. And Olivier will be bringing in a little bit from his experience on the microgrid side of things. So perhaps thinking a little bit more about the clean energy movement within those humanitarian infrastructure settings as well. So bringing that perspective into the conversation. And so while the guys get their videos on, perhaps what I'd ask first is actually if we can go around the table and get a bit of a background insight into the particular projects, operations that you guys have been working on in these humanitarian settings. And perhaps that question we heard also in the first session, what actually encouraged you and your organizations to engage in these settings? Maybe starting with Stefan.
Absolutely, thanks for that introduction. Yeah, so just a little background. Bright Life is a pay-as-you-go solar home distributor that was set up by Think International in 2015 in Uganda. Initially as a project, but really scaled up since then and has delivered clean energy to a few 100,000 Ugandans over the last 6 years. And so we really focus on pico solar home systems. So we're talking 6 to 10 watt systems here, really trying to transition people from kerosene lanterns to this more modern, clean and reliable energy. And so I think, knowing that, you can sort of understand why we were attracted to refugee markets. These are, as you saw, the sort of market opportunity that was presented earlier. They're really prime for sort of the solution that we deliver. That said, as we've sort of constantly expanded throughout Uganda, we actually hadn't entered a refugee community at all until 2018, when USAID put out an RFP called De-risking Pay-Go Solar in Uganda Refugee Settlements. So pretty well designed to incentivize Pay-Go solar operators such as ourselves to enter some of these new markets. And we were fortunate enough to be one of 3 selected. We entered the Kiryondongo refugee settlement, which is about 75,000 refugees in Western Uganda, as well as a pretty large host community around there as well. And so, yeah, we operated there for a little over a year, selling really our traditional Pay-Go solar home systems in that market. And we have a lot of sort of lessons learned from that experience. And look forward to sort of sharing them throughout this panel.
Fantastic, thanks, Stefan. Maybe handing then to Mansour. Oh, Mansour, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Got you.
Perfect. No, thank you so much, and great seeing you all again. At Bbox, we've been trying to crack this humanitarian market for a long time, because unfortunately, it impacts a lot of people in a lot of countries, and energy is an important part of ensuring an acceptable quality of life. So it's always felt within Bbox as a right stakeholder and a group of customers to be dealing with. In terms of our success in that ambition is limited, but our ambition still stays there. Our biggest success so far is that we have a shop inside Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, where we are we have staff, we have pay-as-you-go clients. Quite an exciting project. Can talk about that more later on. We work with War Child in Sudan for community engagement inside refugee camps there. Work with Norwegian Refugee Council quite significantly in the DRC for support of UNHCR refugee camps and other displaced population. And also with USAID as well and Catholic Relief as well, done a few select projects in around displaced population groups. And I guess I'll come to that later on, is in terms of also how to work with the refugee camps themselves, working directly with an organization like UNHCR or camp management is hard. Our approach normally has been via donor organizations that are involved in the projects already. So maybe that's my little take on it. And Bbox has solar home systems and mini grids and clean cooking, one of the earlier pay-as-you-go innovators.
Thanks, Mansour. We'll definitely get into the challenges in this space. But before doing that, Olivier, if you could share a little bit from your microgrid perspective.
Yes, thank you, Susie. I hope everyone can hear me well. First of all, just a few words about our Access to Energy program. We've been running this program for 12 years now and developing a wide range of pico-solar microgrid products for the most deprived people. Our main objective on my own KPI, by the way, is how many people I bring access to electricity each year. We've been able to bring such access to 30 million people in the past 12 years. 50 million by 2025 and 80 million 2030. We started to engage with the humanitarian sector mainly through UNHCR back in 2016, and you were asking, what we've done in this field. So we've delivered more than 200,000 pico-solar products to 40 refugee camps. We've been installing pilot projects for better managing the consumption of refugee shelters in camps which are electrified, namely in Jordan. We've been delivering as well solar streetlights to refugee camps in Mexico, in Zimbabwe, help solve the security issues that women and children were facing in those camps. We have also projects which are related to training electricians in the camps, create vocations, and try to build up competencies there. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but yes, we've been very involved and we're very eager to continue this move. And you were asking about why are we interested? Well, simply because this is our mission, to provide access to energy. And the way we do this is through what we call social business, meaning that as secondary KPI, we do not have a mandate to generate profit. We have a mandate to break even, but that's it. Okay, so it's important to notice that as well. And that's it for the introduction. Thank you, Susie. Back to you.
And indeed, I guess that mandate with 80 million people, as Guara mentioned at the beginning, living in these protected crisis settings, so you haven't got energy access. It's a big challenge to be faced. Maybe going back to you, Stefan, in terms of your sort of real world experience of your project in Uganda, be really interested to maybe dig into some of the practical challenges and hurdles that you faced and some of the lessons that you learned in terms of trying to get over those challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be hard to build on the last panel because they addressed a lot of these already, which was fantastic. But I mean, the first barrier to entry that we had while entering Kiryandongo, but also probably been one of the biggest barriers that made us hesitate from entering other refugee communities was sort of the licensing and everything around that. As a private sector player, we're really used to sort of just breaking things and then fixing them afterwards. And in these settings, you can't really do that. You need the proper licenses to enter. Fortunately, under this program, the Office of Prime Minister approved our licenses for all 3 solar companies pretty quickly. I think because USAID, was sort of on their back about it. But it still took a month, and it was only a year-long project. So that cost us some time. I imagine if that top-down pressure wasn't there, it probably would have taken us 3 or 4 months to obtain the necessary licenses to enter the market. And then one of the big ones that came up that we were sort of expecting and we never really found a solution for when comparing the refugee market compared to some of our other more rural markets was around recruiting and retaining staff. We had a very difficult time doing this. You know, on the full-time employee side, we have some theories around that. You know, it probably is a smaller labor pool than in comparison in other rural communities. And there is sort of a competing NGO market, which, you know, has pretty good pay packages, which is fantastic, but can make it a little harder for private sector actors to come in and find that talent that you need to run your operations. And then similarly on our sort of commission-based sales agent side, and this is one that we had a really hard time cracking, was there was just much higher agent attrition than in any other market that we operate in. So I think over a year-long period where we usually had about 40 to 50 active agents, we went through something like 270 agents. So that's a lot of money in terms of training. It's a lot of money in terms of logistics because you have to pass old customers to the new agents so that you can make sure you can maintain that relationship. And it was a very, very big challenge. Then otherwise, you know, a lot of the challenges were really similar to other rural areas, at least for the Kiryondongo settlement, which had to do with M&O issues. So coverage is a challenge in Kiryondongo, and with Apego Solar, you really need good cell coverage so that people can pay for their tokens and then can actually receive them. And so if you have any sort of friction in that transaction, it leads to lower repayment over the long haul, which hurts your sustainability. Similarly, there's less mobile money agents than in lots of other markets, which is a challenge because you have to put the money into the system somewhere to get the money back out. And people don't want to travel, you know, 20 kilometers to deposit money, especially when they're trying to make, you know, payments for a day or two. And then similarly, agent float was a challenge, especially for the deposit payments, which is sort of a larger chunk of funds, you know, $10 to $12. Some of the agents just simply didn't have the float to put that up. But so these are, you know, M&O issues that we deal with sort of all over the country, but they seem particularly acute in these markets. And so I'll stop there and save some comments for Olivia.
Perhaps some of the ways that you try to address those challenges. Obviously, you're mentioning that it's very high turnover in terms of staff. I guess, you know, potentially an opportunity to work with M&Os on some of these other issues, but was there anything, it sounds like it's a relatively short space of time to address those issues, but did you have some strong learnings from that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, COVID hit and shortened the project by quite a bit, which means we didn't get to work through a lot of these issues. But yeah, on the agent recruitment and retention, as well as full-time employees, we did partner with some local NGOs that were working there, especially ones that were working with youth populations, to try to, you know, create jobs for those individuals and sort of have a longer relationship with them. And we had some success there. It took much longer than what we were expecting to set up those relationships. You know, it was a 12-month project, and I think one of the main people we wanted to partner with, it took us 8 months to broker that relationship. So that just sort of wasn't feasible in the short term, but in the end, they did bring some new staff to us. Otherwise, on the M&O stuff, there really, you know, isn't a solution other than patience. You know, the network coverage is growing in all these countries. There are sort of some digital solutions around agent float that we're promoting. And then on the licensing side, as I said, you know, we did have, you know, sort of top-down pressure, so it was processed pretty quickly.
Maybe turning to you, Mansour, I'm wondering if these challenges resonate with you. You mentioned, of course, that the shop is still running in Kakuma, and perhaps some of those challenges you've managed to address. Interesting to get your perspective. Oh, no, it's still on mute. Maybe in the short term, I'll turn to Olivier and see if we can get your sound working again. But Olivier, I guess, yeah, again, maybe perhaps the same question then. Do some of these challenges resonate with you? It sounds like you had obviously a suite of different activities, including training, as well as a particular project. Yeah, interested to get your experiences.
Yes, with pleasure, Susie. In fact, I like to maybe have share some testimony, very practical experience that I had, and I would like to mention one of my first meetings when I joined, it was I think back in 2017, I joined the Access to Energy program at Schneider, and I had my first meeting with an NGO. It was a French one. I will not name that NGO. So we started the meeting, everything was going well, and suddenly the guy in front of me asked me, well, why should I work with you? Because you are a private company, you want to make money on poor people, and by the way, most of the time you guys are heartless, and we are an NGO, and it's important to be mindful of those cultural gaps that can sometimes happen. Obviously, within this panel, this is not the case. We are all very used to humanitarian and private sector to collaborate, but this is not a given. And I have to be fair also on the private company side. Sometimes, when I talk to my colleagues and explaining what I'm doing within Schneider, sometimes they say to me, well, why do you work with those NGOs? They are not in the energy business, and they have long lead times. It's a hell of a commercial investment to get any business running. And it's important to be mindful of those because, in fact, they are not always true. First of all, private sector doesn't necessarily make a bunch of money in these markets, right? Another thing is that making money should not be a rude word, because in fact, this is what makes business scalable, so impact scalable. And on the other hand, it's a little bit too quick assessment on the private sector side to say that NGO are not experienced. In fact, you find a lot of people who are very experienced, not only in very basic historical technologies like diesel genset, but also in renewables. And I think the two are very complementary, because NGO have a foothold in those rural areas where those people live, where private companies normally do not even know those places, how they work, how to engage, etc. So I think there is an educational work to be done sometimes. Again, it's not always the case, but I would say, if you don't quote me for that, but I would say maybe half of the NGOs are not very inclined to work with private sector. And on the private sector, it could be the same. So I think it's important to be mindful of this. Now, when you pass this first barrier, what is also important for private companies like us is to have someone to talk to, someone who is at least a little bit knowledgeable in the energy sector, comfortable to talk energy efficiency, comfortable to talk some technologies that will make projects bankable. I mean, investing, for example, to replace a diesel generator. And if I look at how other industries have moved towards renewable energies and energy efficiency, I can take one example, which is the hotel industry. And if I step back 20 years ago, no hotel manager was concerned about their energy cost. And suddenly there was a big move towards measuring your energy costs. And they realized 10% of their operating cost was energy, laundry, air conditioning, lighting, etc. And they realized that it was quite easy when you start digging into this line of cost, to save half of it. Easy to save half of it, 5%. 5% of their cost, if you translate this into profitability, that's a big amount of money. I have the feeling that the NGO sector today is a little bit in this situation, that they don't really know where they are in terms of energy spending, or at least they don't necessarily understand in detail where the energy costs are, but definitely they are huge. Gaurav was mentioning in the introduction those numbers, 140 million euro. That's absolutely huge. And in order to tackle this, the first thing is first to measure your consumption. Name energy manager, full-time guy who will look into it, and not every NGO has it. It's very hard to find people like Cecilia that Mercy Corps has, or Paul McCallion at UNHCR. Most of NGOs or UN agencies do not have such energy experts, and I think this is an advice I would make to every humanitarian body to be willing to engage into this energy challenge, is to invest in energy manager. Now there are other barriers which has to be overcome, and it was mentioned, I think, previously, refugee camps are settlements which governments like to consider as temporary, even though the average age of a refugee camp, it was mentioned before, is 17 years. In fact, it is quite difficult to invest in reliable, robust, and durable infrastructure just for regulatory reasons. And another difficulty I should mention here is that by nature, NGOs and UN have yearly non-reconductible budgets, which are mainly based on donation. And for this reason, it's not easy for such entities to invest over several years and have, as we would do in a private company, we would invest in a, let's say, solar microgrid, and we can amortize this investment over 4, 5, 6 years. It's not easy for NGOs to do this because they don't know what their budget will be next year or the year after. This is why I believe, again, I'm trying to propose some ideas. We're working on it already with Mercy Corps and UNHCR, is not pay as you go, but energy as a service. For example, is it possible to lease a microgrid rather than ask the users to invest fully in the capex in the first place? Okay, so these are, let's say, barriers, challenges I see, and maybe some ideas, and I'm happy to share based on that experience that I'm having for the past 5 years.
That's great. Thanks, Olivier. I think we've gone through a large range of things, talking about project or budgetary length, capacity of the local workforce, as well as the knowledge and awareness within the different agencies themselves. So particularly a recommendation there to have a particularly an energy manager or someone who's focused on that specifically. But have we got you, Mansour? Have we got some audio for you to jump in on this challenges and lessons learned question?
Yes, I think your organizer was very active in muting me forcefully, but it's all right. I'm back now. I can relate to a lot of the stuff being said here, but maybe just adding some operational perspective here, and without naming any of the country names, some general trends from places that we have visited and have active operations in. There's this contradiction between temporary nature of refugee camps and the reality that people are long-term residents. So the willingness to invest in long-term infrastructure versus consumable. There's a real contradiction between those two things, right? And that makes it quite difficult. The second thing is that refugees normally, depending on the context here, should not have employment rights or extremely limited such, right? So when you're recruiting staff to do the operations, to install things, to do stuff, and how they pay for it, right? Who's the actual customer here, right? Like, who's paying on their behalf or directly? The third thing as well is that what I will call like sort of the black market of refugee camps, right? Like the truth is this. I visited a few places in the Middle East and in Africa, and they're small generators. People are providing their own little mini grid systems, powering households, etc. There's a thriving market for providing energy in a not as organized, above board way probably, but it's happening. So these people, refugees, are spending money on energy, are creating income, and they are incumbents. And it's that there's also that aspect of community relationship that needs to be managed to be able to scale down. Then the thing that I found very interesting through the Kakuma experience, which we also published in a report, was the interaction with the host community, right? Like there's always this sort of tension between the refugee community and host community, because the host community itself does not have electricity. So I think it's very important to look at this approach holistically, especially when the host community and the refugee community over a long period of time have more or less been integrated into a similar economic model. So I think those are sort of things that are quite, makes it very weird. I can't describe any better word. Makes it very weird to operate, because the intentions are there, but you look at a lot of stuff, it makes no sense. And the biggest frustration is that, as I mentioned in the preparatory call, is that you don't know who's in charge, right? who can you go to sit down to actually figure out, because there's like 5 million stakeholders, which is great. But as a private company, you need to be able to work with your customer, right? Or with the decision maker on the other side. There's a real lack of authority in our experience, and I might be very wrong here, but from a VBox experience, to actually work through these issues, right? So to drive that. And you start becoming like ping pong between many different topics, and it becomes quite difficult to actually do something constructively and scalably. And the last point I'll come to is that although we talk about the refugee community or humanitarian community as a huge marketplace, the truth is that they are fragmented because the authority is not central. It's very localized. Like Pakistan will have its rules, Kenya will have its rules, Lebanon will have rules, DRC will have its rules, etc. Right? It's not like you can make something happen in Geneva, and I'm happy to be very wrong here. That can be cross-applied to across the whole population group of displaced population. And that makes the scalability element very difficult because you have to understand the Kenyan context, you have to understand the Lebanese context, etc., to be able to actually make a scalable product, right? And that's what we're trying to do as a company, to create a product one time and sell it multiple times. And what is the product market fit for the refugee or humanitarian sector, we still haven't figured out, because whatever we've done is sort of piloting, small scale, non-replicable, and not scalable. And I think that's the big sort of private size frustration, right? And I think it's important for me to express that, because I do understand the challenge on the other side. But if there's an expectation on the private side to be able to actually make a tangible difference here, those are important foundational bottlenecks that will have to be solved to truly make this a marketplace, and it should be, and a lot of people can benefit.
Great, thanks, Mansoor. I realize we've actually only got 3 minutes till the Q&A session. I'm going to try and whiz around another question or two before we hand over to Q&A. But so for anyone on the line, please do share your questions in, and if you have a particular panelist you want to target with a question, please do that. But I heard you mention there, of course, the host communities, Mansoor, and that tension between, or potential tension between a host community and the people living in the refugee settlement, which also came up in the panel session before. I know, Stefan, in the project you were working on, that was sort of dealt with in terms of the project design. It'd be interesting just to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think what Mansoor just said is really important, because context matters here. And so in Uganda, for example, it's a very forward-thinking or sort of progressive humanitarian environment. So the refugees there can work. The refugees have ID, not a national ID, but a different ID. And they can also sort of move around with the host community. And so fortunately for our project, it was a mix that we were selling to the host community as well as the refugees. And we had that opportunity. But, you know, I think as Mansoor rightly points out, we can't scale that model to other countries. You know, if we go to Kenya, it's going to be a different regulatory environment. If we go to Ethiopia, it's going to be a different regulatory environment. And then that really is the biggest challenge that we face as the private sector is we are trying to create this one widget that we can then sell a million times. And I think the other thing that sort of hasn't been talked about, at least with relations to pay-go solar, is it's a capital intensive business model. So we have to raise a massive amount of debt. We're pretty much, that's all the management teams on all these companies are doing at all times to scale the business. And once we raise that capital, we have to pay it back to our investors. And the way to do that, you have to look at which markets you can enter and which market you're going to have the highest return on investment in. Because if you stop paying back your investors, then you're not going to be able to raise additional debt and scale even further. And so that makes a really sort of hard calculation that if there isn't someone subsidizing us to enter these more challenging markets, we're probably going to pick the lowest hanging fruit and stick to more peri-urban areas and stick to areas where we're not going to run into all these challenges that Mansoor brought up that add cost to our operation. So I just wanted to add that one point there.
So then in your perspective, then a subsidization in the main for energy access in humanitarian settings would be almost critical, apart from in some, you know, more peri-urban environments.
Yeah, I think to drive it to scale, it's, you know, it's similar to rural areas where, you know, we're realizing that there are sort of diseconomies to scale in a lot of these markets that we're working in. It's not the same as in Europe. Once you start expanding, it actually becomes cheaper and you make more money on each product you sell. In a lot of these markets, to expand, we're going to even more rural areas. We have to support these customers after we sell to them. And it actually becomes more expensive to operate as we scale to these areas. And so, yeah, I think the whole Pego solar market started coming to a realization that to achieve SDG 7, to achieve all the goals that we have, it's likely that some sort of subsidy is going to have to come in. But yeah, it's similar in these refugee environments as well.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move to Q&A. We already have a few questions coming in, and actually one very much linked to this. Maybe I'll swing to you, Mansour. Obviously, that talk of subsidization. Of course, we know that there are markets within these refugee communities. Again, do you think it has to be that kind of subsidized model? Are there models where it's possible to have a market where you can obviously then ultimately pay back your investors and have a sort of pay-go business and for it to operate? You know, what kind of context or mechanisms would you need behind that to make it successful in the longer term?
Okay, I can speak now. Great. I think that the core to scalable financing is a homogeneous profile of credit risk, right? So how homogeneous is that profile of credit risk in the community that we are about to serve, right? And that will matter a lot. So to be able to finance it, there's two ways to do that. One is to provide guarantees on that receivable financing, basically, that de-risks the investment. There's sort of donors could take part of the performance risk of that portfolio. The second thing is a subsidy model, right? And the question is really about also the combination here, because if you're talking about SDG 7, we're not just talking about electricity, we're also talking about cooking here as well, right? Potentially also access to water if water pumps are needed and things of that sort, right? So I think it's quite important to take a holistic approach on that front. In communities that have been there for a very long time, that are more or less a city, an established community, I think guarantees would work much better. In communities where there is like very new and has other sort of externalities attached to it, grant and subsidies would work much better as well. And the combination of both, of course, makes a lot of sense. But those would be my two sort of positioning of that.
We have another question actually coming up. It's a bit linked, and I'm hoping it's because there's a philanthropist in the audience wondering how to get involved. But they're wondering if you had advice for philanthropists to jump into this sector, how could they kind of support the private sector in terms of maybe some of the grant agreements or some of those kind of mechanisms that you touch on there, Mansour? Any advice to philanthropists?
Going back to the product market fit, right? What would be really interesting if for someone who is willing to support this, right, is to encourage companies to actually develop a product market fit solution and a business model. Because the truth is, at least at Bbox, we haven't spent the time to really understand how does this whole ecosystem actually work improperly. What is the product market fit that would work? What is the financing strategy? It needs a few very smart people to work on that for a period of time to actually define that product market fit and actually design a scalable solution for where more money can be attracted, right? Maybe Olivia, you have much more experience on what that exact ask would be, but that starting point, I think where people get very tempted to go straight to the customer and try to fund the product, which I'm very happy to do. But if you want to take one step back, really think about it and design that solution, I think that would be the most impactful money today in this space.
Great. Maybe then turning to you, Olivia. I've also got a particular question for you after that one. But yeah, your comments on Mansour's idea and if you have anything else to add for philanthropists.
Oh, first of all, I fully agree with Mansour comment. And if I refer to my latest visit to refugee camps, in fact, what I realize is that wherever we organize it or not, this market is happening. I mean, I can picture rooms where Syrians are sat on the floor, and then they are finding ways to recharge mobile phones. They use adapters or whatever they can find. And most of the time what they can find on the local market is absolutely, sorry for the word, shitty products, okay? And I remember that meeting we had, Paul, I think, was in the room some years ago, where there was a guy from UNHCR in Geneva coming back to the office and saying, wow, I'm very puzzled because I've seen so many solar lanterns in the camps, but they hardly work after 3 months. And you know, that is something that happens when you don't really organize. So what I feel, I would really much concur with Mansour. What I feel is there's a need for better structuring how to operate a business in a camp, maybe to have authorized products only, because I feel there are very lousy companies benefiting the fact that there is not much technical know-how to choose the right product there. And in the local market, sometimes the products are very, very weak. Okay, so in my view, yes, there is a role to play from the bodies which are managing the camp, namely NGOs, UNHCR. And I think there is a best practice that has been done, and that was led by UNHCR in the past, is a framework agreement on solar lanterns, which I think have enabled all refugee camps to stop these lousy products from entering the camps. I think it would be interesting to look at how we could do this for solar home systems, for PEGO systems. And I think that's really where we'll be interested, as well as BBox, to participate in the discussions.
Great, and it's a little bit of a tangent
Susan,
away from what.
oh. I was just going to add one thing to that, if that's okay.
Go
I
for
was
it.
just going to say one sort of scalable solution that I think could be worked on is around financial literacy. You know, in a lot of these communities, this was brought up before. They just have trouble sort of understanding the savings models, repayment models that we're presenting to them. And financial literacy is something that can scale pretty easily. So I think that's sort of an intervention that a philanthropist could look at working on with someone like UNHCR or sort of some of the other more central operators with regards to refugee communities.
And Stefan, did you have any experience, particularly with that financial literacy, and how you might do that in practice in terms of upscaling such a large amount of people in a relatively short space of time?
Yeah, not in a short pace of time. No. Look, there are programs out there that are designed to help with this, but I think it would obviously have to be mixed in with sort of other education components that are already happening at the refugee level. Are there other sort of marketing campaigns? I think we talked about this earlier, but you know, the marketing sort of solutions in these refugee communities is different than sort of in host communities. We rely on radio quite a bit more. So you could do sort of financial literacy programs over the radio. I think there are solutions that could scale. I'm not sure I have them off the top of my head now.
No worries. Maybe turning back to you, Olivier, there's a question from the audience talking a little bit, maybe moving from capacity of the population itself to capacities in terms of training that you touched on a little bit earlier. Audience is interested to understand how often you need to train, if retraining is needed, you know, how maybe some technical agencies might be involved in that to try and help create something sustainable. Again, interested to get your experience.
Okay, yes, I think training is important because it's very key to develop those skills in order to operate systems or even make sure that the electrical systems installed in the camps are up to the normal standards, let's say. So far, we're not very experienced inside camps. We've trained, I think it's more than 200,000 electricians in rural areas, very few in camps. Actually, the projects I was mentioning are ongoing. We've one in Cameroon, we've one in Bangladesh, in the Rohingya camp. And basically, we have both the objective to train electricians, create vocations, as I said before, and also we would like to speak about the next step of, you know, it's one thing to deliver pico-solar products to camps. It's another one to look at how do we manage end of life? How do we recycle? And the idea is to start such centers in camps that we have started to equip back in 2016, because we're about to reach the end of life for those. They are used every day with one cycle on full discharge every day, so for 5-6 years. And the idea would be to train people how to retrofit those lanterns and make it a business inside the camp, so that the lamps could be retrieved. We change the parts that are faulty, and then they could sell back the lamps and generate revenue. So that is still at infantry stage. It's still a project that we are willing to conduct. But still, I think that's a good example of how private sector and humanitarian could collaborate, not only on just selling product, but also looking at footprint, looking at recyclability, etc.
That's a great example, and I think interesting because we've only got a few minutes left, but we did have a question through asking about bright spots. Obviously, we've talked about a lot of challenges. I think you mentioned there, Olivier, a potential bright spot in terms of reusing parts, training the local community to engage, perhaps working with others on that. But maybe if I can go around the group so that we can end on perhaps a positive note. What are the bright spots, or what would the kind of catalytic changes be that you might imagine possible from the settings that you're in, that we should be talking about and taking away from this call? Maybe starting with you, Mansour.
No, I think firstly, this conversation is really important, right? Like, I think this is a great starting step, and I had some great conversation with Thomas and Jamie from UNHCR, and I think there's a part of solving a problem is defining the problem, and I think that's what we're doing. And let's be honest here as well, our solutions didn't really exist 10 years ago, right? So we're a fairly new industry, right? Like in terms of pay-as-you-go solar or lithium batteries and all of this stuff. So it's only now that sort of the timing is right. Like, if you're not too late, we can solve this. And I think a better coordination between the different parties and making the process more commercial and having honest conversation is the step. So I'm super excited about what we could do together to help more people.
Fantastic. Perhaps just going around the group, the same question to you, Stefan.
Yeah, so look, I think the biggest bright spot is that, through our project at least, we realize the demand is there. These are solutions that these populations demand, they want, and even in contexts where, they've potentially been given free solar lanterns previously, solar home systems are still attractive to them, and many of them will put up their own capital to procure those. So in that way, we have begun really just evaluating refugee communities in a similar way that we evaluate any new market that we're going to enter. We've seen that it is a viable place that we can work. There are some additional costs, there are some additional challenges, but we can build those into our models. And we do evaluate them against similar criteria that we do other new markets that we're looking to enter. So I think that's a lessons learned that we had that we now look to take to new countries as well.
Right, and with just lastly, some apologies to those people who sent in questions where we won't quite get to them. Let me hand over to Olivier for some final thoughts also in terms of the bright spots and perhaps opportunities looking forward.
Yes, in terms of bright spot, I would mention that, well, unfortunately, today, 1 person out of 100 living on this planet is a refugee. And as a result, this is a huge market. It's a huge market opportunity. And it can only increase because we can see a very big wave coming that more and more donors are asking the recipient, NGOs, UN, etc., to prove that they are striving towards clean energy, clean, affordable energy. And I think this is really a big market for the future, and I think it's worth investing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think we're heading into closing the panel now, so it just remains for me to say thank you so much to all of our different panelists. As I say, apologies to those whose questions didn't get answered within the call, but I'm hoping, Jyoti, you have some great ideas for how we can get some answers to those people who've shared those questions post the event.
Indeed. Thanks, Susie. We've kept track of all of them. Some of them are trickling now into the third, but we definitely hope to actually continue this dialogue either via further discussion or even thought leadership efforts going forward. So thank you so much, Susie, for facilitating this panel, and to Stefan, Mansour, and Olivier. Thought that was quite a dynamic and candid sharing of your own personal experiences, and look forward to actually in the next session discussing how do we find ways in which to overcome some of the barriers that were brought up in this past session, and articulate what models for collaboration are really going to work. So again, we'd love for you all to hang in there for a few minutes. We'll take another breather and be back in about 4 minutes for our final panel, which will be a large one actually. So a good debate and discussion between humanitarian sector and private sector companies. So please stick around after this quick bio break. Thanks. Hi, everybody. We'll take advantage of the momentum we've created and perhaps start straight into the final panel, especially since we have a lot of people on this one. So Thomas, would like to welcome you to facilitate our third and final panel session. And everybody, just a quick introduction. Thomas Folgrub is the strategic lead of the coordination unit for the Global Plan of Action for Sustainable Energy Solutions in situations of displacement, and brings a lot of kind of niche expertise in this space. So really excited to have you here, Thomas, and over to you.
Thanks, Jofi. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, thank you all for joining our late session. And I guess for many of you, it's first of all late, and you you're on the panel on this webinar now for almost 2 hours. So we are trying to come up with some concrete ideas and some interesting speakers here, which I can promise that we have them on the panel today, to make it as interactive as possible with all of you. So if my dear panelists could put their video on, that would be great. We have, also thanks to our new way of working in COVID times, we have panelists from 3 continents, I just realized. So we have people from Africa, we have Paul from Bangladesh, and we have people from Europe, so it's great. I'll introduce them one by one. So the first speaker will be Jaime de Bourbon de Parme. He's the Senior Advisor on Private Sector Partnerships at UNHCR. And in his sort of second job, he's also the co-chair together with me for the Clean Energy Challenge. So I'm really happy to work with him a lot of time. And as Mansour already mentioned, we see the Clean Energy Challenge and the GPA as a platform to really get engaged with all the relevant partners and bring them all together who are interested in this SDG 7 topic in displacement settings. The next on the list was already mentioned a couple of times, Paul McCallion, a champion in his sword in Bangladesh, working for UNHCR, being the team lead of energy and environment, one of the sort of longest expert I know, at least in this space. I'm happy to have Paul on the panel. Next one will be Cecilia. You already heard her. She's the Energy Access Lead at Mercy Corps. And then the second woman on the panel is Charlotte Heffer, the Director for Partnerships at D-Light. And she's also supporting her own colleagues in developing new markets and managing strategic partnerships. And also, she's a gender equality champion for D-Light. Maybe we can also talk about the gender topic in a later stage when it comes to energy. This is also something we need to work on. And last but not least, David Otieno from GIZ, from the NDEF program, Energizing Development Program. NDEF is David is an engineer by training and is working since 20 years in various capacity and programs in this space. So happy to have you all on the panel. Jaime, are you there as well? I can't see you yet.
Hi, Thomas. Somehow, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So somehow I don't get a picture for camera. I still have to be upgraded as a panelist, I believe. But let's do it. Let's do it without a face. Okay, great to see you. Great to see you all, and Thomas. So your question. Could you repeat your question?
Yes, I haven't asked the question. I just wanted to see if you are online already.
I'm there. So the answer is yes.
Good. Jaime, you will sort of set the scene for us. We heard a lot about the complexity of the relationship between the private sector and the NGOs. We heard about the thriving market, which we all see, and we also heard about the need for a collaboration between the private sector and the humanitarian partners. So, Jaime, could you sort of update us on what are the very concrete opportunities for a private company to get engaged with UNHCR?
Sure. So there's two ways of the private sector to get engaged, and one is the most straightforward, which is through procurement. That's the easiest way. You've got money, and once you get the money, you implement, and there we are. And a lot of private companies go like, "Why don't you give us the money, and we'll figure it out, and we'll do it for you." But of course, we have to go through procurement rules, and we'll know that they're there, and they're there to ensure us that we get the best quality for the lowest price, but also to avoid favoritism or even corruption. So we've got the rules, and that's the way it works. So that's pretty straightforward, and we all know that. And what are the opportunities for the private sector on the procurement side? Well, we have budgets for our own use. So for our own infrastructure, to power our own offices in the deep field, we have a budget, for instance, for diesel, and we have 2,000 diesel generators out there. So we are the most polluting UN agency just because we've got the biggest field presence, and that's the opportunity now to make that energy transition towards cleaner and safer energy. So we're now running a lot of data on all our operations to figure out what the energy use is, what the budget's going to it, and what the best solutions to are, and mostly will be solar-based solutions. So that's happening, and once we have that, there'll be procurement angles there for the private sector, either globally, regionally, or locally. We still have to figure out what the best procurement angle will be. Now, we do have problems that we have short-term budgets, and so we're developing also innovative finance tools. And these innovative finance tools will help us because right now to free a big budget to pay for solar infrastructure, and we take that away from a humanitarian budget that should feed and save people's lives, that's a very tough decision for us to make. But with innovative finance, so we can get external investments or donations even, and they can take the upfront cost, and then we repay over time with the savings we have with solar energy, which is a lot cheaper than diesel. So once those innovative finance tools kick off, we can really scale this energy transition in the field. And just so you know, energy for refugees, we hardly ever give that. That's not in our budget. We give other life-saving support. Think of tents in emergency situations or other life-saving equipment. But energy, usually refugees fend for themselves, except for operations like Bangladesh or Rwanda, where we're taking the energy budget and we're paying for LPG because they don't have any recourse to firewood, coal, or other materials. And so our role is we don't have $200 million ready for procurement for energy for refugees. Our role is more to be a catalyst to bring those with budgets, so development actors and the private sector, to deliver solutions for refugees in the field. So that's the procurement perspective. If we then look at the partnerships perspective, the shared value partnerships, and we heard Cecilia and Eva and others speak about that in the first panel, that's an interesting angle as well. And there you go to try to get win-win-win solutions amongst very different partners. And as Cecilia and Eva indicated, the private sector has the knowledge of financial knowledge and modeling and know how to set up big infrastructure projects, and humanitarian actors have the knowledge of the footprint. So we have access to local government, access to markets, protection of refugees are high, so to make sure that they don't run physical harm and no harm from exploitation. We can link it to livelihood projects, and we can lend a lot of credibility and visibility to the projects in the deep field so that the world knows what is happening there. The donors and the private sector and local governments have their role. So you need to really define who's doing what and to make sure that nobody is stepping outside of their comfort zone or skill zone. And we, UNHCR, we are not an energy agency. We don't have the knowledge, and therefore we need to lean on those that have the knowledge. So that's the partnership model. And then you've got a blended model between procurement and partnership that we're exploring now. And Cecilia is part of that, Mercy Corps is part of that, where we're seeing, okay, can we become, as UNHCR with procurement, an anchor customer? And that would create market viability, long-term offtake possibilities, and would be much more interesting for investors. And that would enable, in a way, cross-subsidization to the refugees, and to be able to make it more affordable and the project more viable. And that sounds very logical, simple to do, but if you look at the challenges, and Mansour mentioned how difficult it is to work with big humanitarian agencies, and UNHCR is one of those, because we've got very clear rules. We cannot take loans. Our funding cycle is very short, so we get money from donors from year to year. So that makes it very difficult for us to take long-term offtake agreements. It's not impossible because we lease cars, so we can have other leasing facilities, but we haven't done it yet. So we have to figure out with our lawyers and everybody else, how do we do long-take offtake agreements? And also co-creation is difficult, because if a private sector co-creates a project with us, then we need to go to tender. And if the private sector then has more knowledge than the other attendees, it's not a level playing field. So then the private sector that helped us create the project cannot apply for that project. So that makes it very difficult. And you can overcome that by having open source information that everybody can see, but it is something to navigate. And then the last is high prices. Are we willing to pay as an anchor customer higher prices than we could get on the market to get more services than just energy, but also services that are benefiting refugees, the climate, etc. And again, we can do this, but we have to figure out how. And I think once we've done it in one operation and it makes sense economically and socially and etc., then this becomes a very viable model in the future. So I'm quite positive about that's the way to go. Let me leave it there, Thomas.
Thanks, Jaime. That was a comprehensive overview. And you touched upon a few topics which we will come back to, especially this topic as energy as a service, and how can we finance long-term private sector engagement in a short-term world, short-term cycle situation. So we'll come back to this point. But coming back also to the beginning of an emergency, Cecilia, can you explain to the audience a little bit how how the energy questions is tackled at the beginning of an emergency? What are the needs? How do you finance this on an outset? And what are the typical models here in the beginning of an emergency?
Yeah, sure, Thomas, thanks. I'll try to oversimplify probably things. I would say that mainly at Mercy Corps, we have two types of approaches. The first one is in a situation where there are no market linkages, and that might be because it's just after the aftermath of a natural disaster. So there are no market connections there. And the second type is where actually there are market linkages, but they might be broken or weakened, but they're still present. So in the first scenario, and we can call it like in kind of distribution scenario, probably Mercy Corps operates in a more traditional way, where basically we directly donate solar equipment or improved cook stoves to people. In this case, as well as I was talking before, attention to quality is paramount for Mercy Corps. So as I was mentioned before, we run tenders, and through these tenders, we reach what we call a master purchase agreement, where we select vetted providers that have what was Lighting Global certified products, now Verasol products, and third-party certified cook stoves. The partnerships that we create in this way would allow us to reply in a very quick way, so we would be able to deploy our equipment in 48 hours after the request is made. So I would say really the value drivers here are speed and quality, and the main scope is really to sort of stabilize an acute emergency. The second scenario, and we can call it market-based scenario, is probably more in line with our global mandate. We really strive to build the resilience from within the communities we operate with, and this is where partnerships really truly come into play, and the objective is a transformational change. So here probably we are looking more at protracted crisis, where we would start with a market assessment, analyzing the gaps in both the supply and demand sides, but also identifying the different stakeholders along the value chain, and again selecting through tenders our partners, then to accompany them throughout the ideation implementation phases. So I would say that, again, we go back a little bit to what was discussed in the other two panels, the regulatory framework on both the supply and demand side are really important if we think about like the possibility for refugees to have bank accounts, to work, to have ID cards, for instance, are paramount. To apply the second model, but also on the supply side, we really have to look at the regulations of a given country for import for quality solar products, for instance, but also the ability to produce, distribute, and sell energy. So I would say that having also the regulatory framework really clear in front of us is essential to determine which of the two aspects we can really try to follow. The value drivers of this second approach, the market-based one, are sustainability, impact, scale, and definitely, again, a dignity for the refugees. I'd say that there's really not a value judgment attached to one model or the other. One can be best suitable for a given situation than the other. I'd say that the second one definitely probably speaks more to sustainability and long-term impact.
Thanks, Cecilia. And for if there are companies on the call who are not familiar with the way that the UN procures certain goods and services, do have a look on UNGM, ungeneralmarketplace.org. That's the sort of centralized platform for all UN organizations where you would find these tenders in a given context. Moving on from sort of, we heard from Cecilia already in the first phase, it goes without saying that this must be a procurement model, right? Because you can't develop a long-term partnership with an energy company when you have to deliver products in 48 hours. But how does it look in a more protected situation? Paul, over to you. You're working now with UNHCR Bangladesh since 2-3 years, and it is still officially an emergency, correct me if I'm wrong, but do you still feel that this is an emergency, and how do you see the energy sort of situation has changed over the time?
Yeah, hello everyone. Yes, here in Bangladesh, it's L2, which is like we're now going into care and maintenance. However, because of the geographical location of Bangladesh, we're in the monsoon season or the cyclone season and coming into the monsoon. So yes, we are now L2. There's no influx. We've stabilized the situation, but you also have the monsoon cyclone season. So we're sort of like out of the refugee response emergency, but we're still in emergency because the geographic location of Bangladesh. Like for example, last 2 weeks ago, the lightning is very because of the geographic location. The lightning is very severe in this country, and a number of refugees were struck by lightning. So we're looking at the private sector model, partnerships, procurement, but even for things like lightning arresters, we have to have a very aggressive approach to addressing, natural-based disasters. So that's where we would be on that. We are on the emergency front. We are now out of the traditional UNHCR emergency influx, but we're now dealing with natural-based hazards. So we're not emergency, but we still are emergency.
Thanks, Paul. And it was already mentioned, I think, by Olivier before. Sort of in this sector here, Bangladesh is quite famous for the LPG program that you're managing. Can you elaborate on this a little bit?
It's so the black hole of energy anywhere is fuel or so basically the electricity front, it's mainly cooling, which is ACs, refrigeration and so forth. But the day-to-day black hole for energy, fuel poverty within Europe, for example, is always related to cooking or heating. So it's no different in the camps. The 70–80% of the fuel needs are always based on fuel. So here we were lucky enough to have 100% fuel coverage from the influx from the onset. 100% fuel coverage means that we identified all the supply chains, compressed rice husks, firewood, briquettes, LPG, natural gas. And LPG, the supply chain was strong, and LPG was identified as the best way to protect against protection risks as in going to the forest. So it dealt with the social cohesion between the host community and the refugee community. It dealt with the deforestation. So basically, we went into LPG, IOM and UNHCR, both adopted LPG for the camps. The camps are 800, around 864, something like that, thousand. So basically, between UNHCR and IOM, we went into LPG. What is interesting now is we are going into fuel efficiency. So we did a pre-pilot before we did a pilot because we needed to know how we could bring in fuel efficiency without interrupting food and the needs and the cooking habits of refugees. So we did a pre-pilot. So the pre-pilot is indicating at this stage around 12 to 15% efficiency. That was based on the pot size, the baseline. So we are looking to go now to 20-25%, up to 30%, maybe within a year's time. So we're now introducing the fuel efficiency. So we've stabilized the fuel. We understand refugees' eating habits. We understand the need for fuel on the change of the seasons. So we're now looking at the fuel efficiency with a view to introducing fuel efficiency and making LPG a lot more sustainable. So we're also between the two agencies, we've got 71,000. We've a commitment to 71,000 households in the host community, which is actually there's a lot of indicators on health because of respiratory issues that this will have a big impact on. And firewood collection was at 90,000 tons pre-influx. It's now at 30,000 tons. So it's well into the sustainable forestry model within the host community. So the LPG, whether it's the data collection or the M&E, it's really given some good lessons learned for the private sector. And within the private sector, we take all our guidance, and a lot of planning came from the World LPG Association, which is the umbrella group for the for over 200 LPG suppliers globally. Over.
Thanks, Paul. And just to clarify, the model is based on a procurement, but obviously you would have a logistic partner in the background who would actually organize the distribution.
Yes. So within the operation, refugees do not have access to work. So to open it up to the private sector, like even mobile cash transfers is currently not allowed. So we are based on a very large, whether it's either you an agency, we are based on a very large procurement frame agreement. So we do a tender, and there are over 32 companies who supply LPG within Bangladesh, and it's thrown open. Some are national, some are the subcontractor of multinational, and so forth. So it's based on that model. It's the tender model. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, it just shows how important the enabling environment is, right? This is really one of the biggest questions. Are the people allowed to work? Are there what is the ability to pay for them in order to define any other model than a procurement model, a pure procurement model? Thanks, Paul. Over to David. David, you're working for NDEF, which is per se, I would say, the leading energy program when it comes to development settings. So you're also working in humanitarian settings, but I would say 80–90% of your work is more on development space. How would you see the change from the business model, the operating model, from a procurement to a more partnership model when it comes to protective crisis?
Yeah, thank you so much, Thomas. Maybe I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe just to start off, so the two, as Jay said, we have two programs that are running in the country. One is the global program, Energizing Development. As you mentioned, it is kind of covering a number of countries, where Ethiopia is just one of them, and we're focusing on the humanitarian context in that respect. The second one is more a German-funded project, Energy Solutions for Displacement Settings. In this case, we are working or implementing jointly with UNHCR, in particular looking at Gambela. So for both projects, we are looking at, as you know, I mean, there's so many other regions or so many camps in Ethiopia, but we zero down into Gambela for obvious reasons. For those of you who know Ethiopia very well, Gambela has more than 800,000 refugees. And in this case, I mean, in Ethiopia, the entire Ethiopia, we have roughly 800,000 refugees. And out of that, almost 40 to 50% alone are in Gambela. And that's why the focus is on that. Now, you mentioned about, you know, what our focus is. Within these two projects, we are looking at the entire chain. One is the cooking energy sector, which so many speakers have spoken about it, when we know the negative impacts of let's say the non-efficient means of cooking that are happening in different parts of these refugee areas. And then we have also the other side where we're looking at electrification. And in these cases, in particular, we're focusing on two dimensions of both. One is, as you've just rightfully mentioned, Thomas, the enabling environment is very important. So we're focusing on supporting the regulatory environment, kind of creating a dialogue between, you know, the actors within the refugee context, but also the government on the other hand. So this is one element that we are zeroing into a lot by having, let's say, monthly discussions where some of the participants here, including Masiko, also joins in this kind of discussions, because we think unless we change the rhythm within the policy, within the regulatory environment to create a conducive setting, then yeah, nothing will take off. Secondly, we are trying to come up with the, let's say, pilot initiatives, both in the cooking energy, but also in the electrification. In particular, and this is where I could mention, let's say, the difference, we are focusing a lot on market-based approaches. Here, I know that there could be challenges in different directions. However, when we started off, the starting point together with the UNHCR and other actors was to engage with the private sector, because unless you loop in the private sector from the beginning, then you will miss the point all through. So what we've done is more to involve at the starting point the private sector. I mean, how do we do this? We first started with the associations. As you know, in Ethiopia there is you know, a growing up solar energy association where now we kind of create an environment to make them realize that there is an opportunity, the market opportunities in the refugee areas, and not only the solar energy associations, but also the cooking energy alliance, the cook stove alliances and associations. What we've done here is to capitalize on existing markets, because one thing we noticed is even minus energy, minus anything else, there are markets, and I think I was listening to the other panelists before. That is something that we fail to understand. I mean, there are markets that are happening anyway in those areas. I mean, you'll find refugees with mobile phones. They need to charge them. You'll find them. I mean, different markets that are happening, and this also is augmented by the policy. Let's say on a higher level in Ethiopia. Maybe some of you have already mentioned, if you look at the right to work, for instance, in Ethiopia, and this is also considered at a very high political level, there is a right for refugees to work. For instance, I know that in some countries it is a problem. And also, if you read through the global compact on refugees, I mean, you'll find also the elements that drive this bit of the market-based approaches. And as you know, Ethiopia has actually committed to provide market-based approaches for sustainable households and institutions. And this is something that as partners, we are capitalizing on this very strong political will, but also the UNHCR commitment into this direction. Maybe something that I could mention is that, and Amy also mentioned that refugees, spend for themselves. If you look at the energy aspect, it is an item that it is left on their own, and that's why when we come in, we're looking at the fact that UNHCR cannot cover that part, and as partners, how do we ensure that it is sustained for a long period of time? And in this case, for the sustainability part, and also you can imagine what women in those areas or girls go through collecting firewood, it is just immense. So that is why we focus on that to make sure that the process is also sustained for future. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and thank you also for mentioning this household expenditure aspect. And it was interesting. We know from research that, and I'm sure the panelists can confirm this, that on average, I would say there's between 15 and 25% of household expenditure from these population we're talking about are spent for energy. Candles, kerosene, and firewood, and so on. And I was in a panel with the World Bank the other day, and the World Bank benchmark for household expenditure is 5%. So it's really, it goes to show that we need to really drive down the prices and the costs for electricity and for energy in general for this population. But that's also a good segue to Charlotte. Charlotte, you've heard about this now a couple of times. You were following this session already. What is your take as a sort of private company versus on the procurement versus the partnership model?
Sure. Well, I think, and I understand that there is a necessity for both of these models. And I think that from the private sector perspective, D-Light has been around for 12 years, and we are one of the leading manufacturers of solar products. I mean, solar home systems, solar lanterns. And yet for us, it's been very difficult to get our foot into the door of this humanitarian space. And I believe that one of the challenges is in the way that the procurement is done. So certain development agencies or development partners, it's the way that they do the tendering, it's the way that the bids are put out, and in some cases, the way that the technical specifications are put together. In many cases, they're written in such a way that the winner has essentially already been chosen, and therefore precluding most manufacturers, quality manufacturers, from even applying. And then there's this kind of legacy issue. Once you're used to, if you're working in this context, you're used to a certain product, then it can happen that when you write up your procurement, you want the product to be the same as that one that you've seen before. And I think that this, first of all, there's a barrier to entry for other quality suppliers. It's not to say that the largest players in the off-grid solar space should not be present in humanitarian settings. And it's strange to some extent that we aren't more present. And then of course there's when these kind of processes go ahead, then there's no choice again for the customer. Products are given away, they're not valued, and we all know the issue of that. So while we understand that procurement does need to be done, I do believe that it could potentially be done in a different way. And then when we talk about partnerships in that sense as well, it can be hard to find the partners. It's not always easy to know where the partnerships are, who is the person, as Mansour also mentioned before. But also, where these bids are being placed. So for example, we've applied for some of these framework agreements and we've been approved as a supplier, and yet we're never called upon because there's this decentralization. Agreements and frameworks are made centrally, and then country offices will then do procurement, and then again we're precluded. And it kind of is a little bit of a vicious cycle, and again a bit difficult to get in. And so not just to pick out on things that are challenges, but also to try and suggest something that might be a preferable way. Of course, it's difficult to do, and I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, but when if there were a way of kind of testing out an energy budget, we know that there are more and more cash transfers to refugees or displaced people, and so if they had the opportunity to then choose which product it was that they wanted to have, either these products could have been procured or they could have been through a framework agreement, but there would be several, and then the affected person could choose. So I suppose that those are my main points. I think that this issue about earning profits from affected people is also a bit misplaced, because when you procure, do you not think that somebody's making a profit? Like, of course they are. And when it comes to what do people want energy, people want access to energy. They have a right to having access to energy in their homes, of course. I'm only talking about household solutions here. Then there should certainly be more opportunity for them to source a product that would meet their needs.
Thank you very much. Indeed, this is also one of the arguments I'm bringing up when I talk to the private sector. It is also about, I think Eva mentioned it also in the first panel. It's about bringing diversity into this space, giving people a choice to buy a certain product, purchase a certain product. Thank you for this. We're already in the Q&A time, and we already have a few questions here. And one that is coming up, and I also promised to come back to this, is this question of energy as a service. So we have a question here, someone complaining, rightly so, that very often solar projects are set up in a procurement model way, and then after 6 months they're not working anymore. And we've seen this, I've seen this, Paul has seen this in the past. So I think this is a common problem. And one of the areas, and that was also mentioned in the introduction by Jaime, is how can we switch this? How can we use what we spend for diesel now in a partnership model, which is energy as a service, essentially? We still have to go through a procurement service, but at the end, instead of buying the equipment, we buy the service. Cecilia and Paul, what is your take on this one?
That, to be honest, I wish I had the answer. We have, I think, what is a very solid model that I really wants to sell energy as a service, taking away all the procurement process, all the operation and maintenance headaches that come with this type of infrastructure. And yet it's not that easy to find these anchor clients that really wanted to be there and give to this structure, that security of income that the structure needs just to take off. So it's very hard. It's very hard. I definitely understand that the issue of having these annual budget cycles, that does not facilitate things, but I also know that there are other mechanisms, and of course the GPA is really leading the way on this in trying to find alternative roads. I'm thinking about these global insurance mechanisms that we might consider, for instance. So I think that it's really very much up for discussion. As Jaime said before, there are techniques that are currently used for leasing vehicles, for instance. Why not to do something similar but different for acquiring energy as a service? So yeah, very much open to keep discussing these, and if somebody comes up with a viable solution. yeah, let me know.
Yeah, I think it's the low-hanging fruit, but it's still not low-hanging, right? It's because the agencies, the organizations are already paying for diesel, and they're paying quite a lot, as we've heard. Paul, what is your take on this? I know you tried this already, or you're going to try it in Bangladesh.
If we just keep it at the, say, the refugee household level, without going diesel and all that side of it. So in Bangladesh, the most popular product with refugees is 600 to 800 taka. Now that's it's about $6 to $10, right? That's a solar home system. So that's three lights, battery, panel. It doesn't have a charge controller. For those of you who do not know, a charge controller is the brain that stops the system from heating up and the battery explode. That is not approved by Lighten Asia or Lighten Africa or Lighten Globe, but they are making their own choice to buy that system. Buying that system because it's a wet cell battery, not a lithium battery, which can be recycled in country, which they understand how to do it. So one, they're making their own choice, even in a highly restricted environment like Bangladesh. Two, on the Charlotte, behind you, that second light, there are, not the torch, that light behind you, there are hundreds, yes, hundreds of those in the camps. So they are getting there, believe me, but it's down to each household to make a choice. So there are hundreds of those in the camps. So basically, solar systems not working in lots of cases. UN agencies have big warehouses, influx happen, or there's a certain model, and we get the products that are come from the warehouse. They're 6 months old, they're 9 months old, and they don't, during an influx, you don't talk to the host community, you don't talk to the refugee community. You do, but you call it a rapid assessment, and it's a needs-based rapid assessment, and it's not. Basically, communities are introduced to technologies that they're not used to. And we are finding that with LPG and the pressure cooker. These are refugees who less than 2% have been introduced to LPG and less than 2% for the pressure cooker. But they're adapting to it because we engage in focus group discussions, we engage in very, very prudent and cautious approaches. And it's the same with everything we do, from education on lightning, education on the elephants, what not to do with elephants, what to do with elephants, and so forth. So basically, solar needs to go through the same transition. You need to talk, you need to understand, but during an influx, we just go to the warehouse and we just throw it all out. So I think that's a big problem. And also, affordability is a big problem, because the 600 and 800 taka home solar systems are word of mouth that transfers around from the host community to the camps. It's a good system, buy it, even though it wouldn't make quality control on Lighten Asia, Lighten Africa.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm terribly sorry, I'm realizing we're running out of time. And I want to thank you, my panelists today, and thank you, Charlotte, Cecilia, Paul, David, Jaime. It was a very interactive panel, I hope. Unfortunately, we couldn't answer all the questions that came in, but at least I hope we're able to give an idea of how to be engaged in this sector and what concrete collaboration models there are out there. And for the final words, I'm handing over back to Eva from Shell. Eva, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. I have just 2 minutes, I think, to close off, and I realize I'm standing in the way of some people going to bed, others having dinner, so I'll keep it short. And there are 3 points really I would like to bring across. First of all, on behalf of the co-conveners, I'd like to thank all the panelists who took the time to share openly the challenges, but also the opportunities and their needs. And I'd also like to thank the audience, of course, for sending across the questions and for showing the activity and the interest that they did. Secondly, you will receive an email after this webinar asking for your feedback through a survey, but you'll also be receiving some information that we've been referring to in this webinar. And there'll also be a recording available of this session. But above all, I would like to leave you with my personal reflections, my key takeaways from this session, and I hope this resonates with many of you. It's clear that the challenges are big. You know, as I've been saying, this is a complex problem and it's not going to be solved overnight. But how exciting is it to see that the momentum is there, as we heard many speakers say? How exciting is it to hear that there is a market there? I think that's no longer being denied. We see all the actors take the relevant steps, whether it's policies, whether it's change in purchasing behavior. And I just think that's all in all very encouraging. And I hope this webinar has sparked ideas and will spark more activities to help achieve the goal that we're all trying to achieve, which is clean energy access for displaced people by 2030. So I certainly am committed. The company I work for and represent, Shell, is committed, as I know everybody else on this call. So once again, thank you very much for attending, and I wish you a good rest of the day.